I had a very complicated relationship with money when I was young, mainly because my family didn't have a lot of it. I mean, I started to have less hope about the future because I was working hard and I would get incremental raises, but yet it was never enough and never keeping up with the cost of living. And it's really, really tough to make it. Rent is sky high. A lot of people are paying like 50% of their paycheck on rent, and they're not knowing what they're doing wrong.
So, Natalie, before we get your coin story, I do like to start off the conversations with asking what was your relationship like with money growing up?
I had a very complicated relationship with money when I was young, mainly because my family didn't have a lot of it. So I felt
Okay.
very financially insecure and motivated to change that position. My parents came from Poland, brought me when I was five
Okay.
to the United States in pursuit of the American dream. And I saw them work so hard just to be able to eventually purchase a modest townhome in the Chicago suburbs. And when the great financial crisis hit while I was in college, they lost everything. The bubble
Right.
popped. They had to file for bankruptcy. And I think that really shaped me because I felt that the system was so fundamentally broken and unfair, but I really didn't understand how or why. So, like so many people, I turned to politics. I thought that we should tax the rich and redistribute the wealth. I was sort of part of this growing populist movement while I was serving as a reporter. And then I discovered Bitcoin, and I realized that what I didn't understand was the nature of money, who issues money, why the supply is constantly expanding, and why that's not a good thing when it comes to purchasing power, and how Bitcoin is a solution.
Gotcha. So what time abouts was it when you started understanding what the real cracks in the system are? And how would you summarize them and then talk through your headspace when you discovered Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I didn't discover Bitcoin until 2017, and like so many people, I just dismissed it. I saw it as a speculative gamble, as a lottery ticket. I put a little bit of money in, just again thinking it was like a lottery ticket, but I didn't take the time to study until a few years later when I read the book The Bitcoin Standard, and
Okay.
that's the first book that introduced me to the concept of the history of money and why it's always been inflationary and why that's led to the destruction of many governments and empires in the past. And so that's when I started to realize that the core problem is actually inflation and the fact that our money is controlled by a small group of people. We have no say in the fact that they keep just diluting our dollars. And every time they print more, it affects the purchasing power of all the other dollars in the system. And the people who are closest to accessing the brand new fresh dollars with the Cantillon effect, they benefit. And so we see this tremendous amount of wealth concentration that develops over time. And that obviously leads to frustration among the working class, frustration among really younger generations who feel like they've been left behind and sort of left to work 10 times harder than their parents just to achieve a smaller amount of financial security. So that's what I think is what's most broken, and people have a hard time identifying it because we're not taught anything about financial history or how the financial system works in school. And so I think we turn to politics to sort of vent our frustrations. But if we started to really examine what's wrong with our money, what the central bank does um, with the banking sector, we would realize that there are certain people who benefit from this system at the expense of everyone else. And inflation is literally, it's taxing us, and it's stealing from the working class that creates the productivity but doesn't see the gains.
Mhm. Can you talk about some of the negative further externalities of having that inflation present in like our decision making, our time preference?
Yeah, it's something I didn't think about before, yet I was sort of living it. I mean, I started to have less hope about the future because I was working hard and I would get incremental raises, but yet it was never enough and never keeping up with the cost of living, especially if you live in these big cities, right? I mean, young kids, they go to college, they rack up a ton of debt, and they go to the big city to pursue their careers, and it's really, really tough to make it. Rent is sky high. A lot of people are paying like 50% of their paycheck on on rent, and they're not knowing what they're doing wrong. And really, my argument is that you're not doing anything wrong. It's the system that is increasingly getting more and more difficult for the average person because it's stealing from you in the form of inflation. And so that's why I hope that people kind of take a look at that and say, why do we have a system that constantly dilutes the value of our purchasing power? And if our system needs to continue to be that way, we need a way out in the form of a solid store of value. And so traditionally, people have looked to stocks and properties, right? Real estate, which if you zoom out, it's incredible how much those have gone up over the last few decades. But are they really creating more value, or do the homes represent more value? I mean, a home in 1970 that cost 60,000 today is 500,000. It needs a complete remodel. With some of these stocks, the price to earnings, they make absolutely no sense. They're totally overvalued, and you have no idea what's going to happen with competition and AI and geopolitical risks. So that's why Bitcoin sort of emerges as this neutral asset, a decentralized network and protocol that all of us can opt into peacefully, and represents something that no one can ever manipulate, inflate, steal from us, confiscate. And that's why I think it provides so much hope and promise, not just here in the US, but also globally, because globally people can't all access, their stock portfolios and invest in a piece of Apple or buy a fraction of a beachfront property in Miami. It really gives access to digital property across the world and for people to become more economically empowered. So I think Bitcoin provides the solution to the biggest problem, which is that so many people are economically frustrated and left behind.
Mm-hmm. So through your coin stories, you've been able to interview some of the greatest minds in the Bitcoin space. Is there anything that's come up that could be potential concern for a Bitcoiner? Like, where are the vulnerabilities, if any, that you've heard or seen?
It's been such a journey going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and you start out very, very skeptical and dismissive, and I think that's actually normal. That means that you're thoughtful and careful, especially with your savings. But over time, as you sort of steel man and straw man some of these different arguments and dig deep on them and have interesting debates with people, you realize that Bitcoin is actually the strongest network that exists. It is backed by the most powerful computing network in the entire world. It is technically constantly under attack because the honeypot is so big, and yet it has resisted every form of hacking, every attempt at taking it down. It is nation state grade in that sense. And so that's very, very powerful to know that in 15 years, it has grown to be so diffused and decentralized that really at this point, nothing can take it down because there's so much energy backing it. That's why Michael Saylor, he says that behind Bitcoin, what you'd have to actually penetrate is this massive wall of encrypted energy. And that would be very expensive and time consuming and really has come to be impossible. So I actually think Bitcoin is very, very secure and will continue to do so. I think that the AI concerns and myths are sort of over exaggerated, especially because before Bitcoin is hacked, since it's so secure, pretty much everything else would be hacked before it. And I'm sure we would advance to stages of quantum resistance before that were to happen. And then obviously, like as a Bitcoiner, I've done my homework on the energy component and all of that. So that's not a concern for me either. So at this point, I'm at the stage where so much of my wealth is in Bitcoin because I trust its resiliency so much.
Mm-hmm. I've heard there seems to be rumblings on people, and I know I've looked into like borrowing against Bitcoin in the past, but I've never actually done it. And I know I saw Mark Moss had a calculator on his site where, he shows like with these assumptions, like borrowing in the future and how that would work. I mean, in your view, does like borrowing against Bitcoin actually enhance the fiat system? Like, or do we need to like totally disengage from the current system to like make Bitcoin work?
No, I don't think so. I mean, sometimes you do need to borrow. Sometimes you need to take on a little bit of risk in order to expand your business or to take a chance on some sort of entrepreneurial idea. I mean, that's actually at the root of so many of the wonderful things that have happened over the last century. But a massive problem in our current fiat system is, again, that when everything is controlled and centralized, it leads to monopolies. And so people don't even have a fair chance to compete because the closer you are to the money printer, and as soon as you've been able to balloon immune to becoming some of these like massive mega corporations that own, everything in our grocery store and all the drugs that are out there. I mean, that's a huge problem because the little guy can no longer compete. So I think that actually Bitcoin will level the playing field because you're going to have to actually produce value. No one can cheat the system and be closer to some sort of Bitcoin money printer that does not exist. So I think people will evaluate their risk tolerance. And if they have some Bitcoin that they feel comfortable borrowing against or even maybe lending out, I think that that's a world that we're going to see in the future, and interest rates will probably come down. Right now they're much higher on, say, a Bitcoin loan because it's a very fundamentally different system in terms of volatility and price and liquidity. But I think that will change in the future because Bitcoin is pristine collateral, and again, you can always verify it. It's actually, I think, much safer in many ways to interact with Bitcoin as collateral than in the fiat world, where we just have piled on leverage upon leverage. And the only reason it still works is because there's a bailout coming from the Federal Reserve.
Mhm. How do you see, like, with the onset of these ETFs and the options market? I do find myself sometimes I'll even like sell options on IBIT instead of buying more Bitcoin or MSTR. Like, how do you kind of view like the onset of these other vehicles that are almost kind of competing against the underlying Bitcoin itself?
Traders are going to trade, right? I mean, I believe in free markets. And so
Mhm.
people who want to take on different levels of risk, I think that there will be more and more products that basically cater to people's risk tolerances. And there are hedge funds that are going to be doing things. There are going to be ways to have more. I think we're going to see more products that are actually backed by Bitcoin in the fixed income market, like what Strategy is
Okay.
doing. I think it's just going to be a massive, interesting playing field with lots of different innovative ways to invest in Bitcoin or products that are backed by Bitcoin. And we'll eventually have bit bonds, I think, at the government level. So, what's in your portfolio is none of my business. That's how I always see it. But I prefer spot Bitcoin and self custody.
Hmm. Gotcha. And with some of the conversations you had, maybe the recent few months, like what topics have been sprouting up in the Bitcoin space that have really like piqued your interest?
Well, obviously, people are very interested in the corporate Bitcoin treasuries. I serve on the board of Sumler Scientific, which was the second company actually in the US
Oh,
after
okay,
MicroStrategy to adopt a
cool.
Bitcoin standard. And we've just crossed 5,000 Bitcoin in our treasury. Our goal is to become a Bitcoin powerhouse. So I think those conversations are very interesting and trending right now because so many companies are starting to look at Bitcoin as a legitimate treasury asset. And I think we'll see more and more emerge in the space. And then I also think that the geopolitical narratives are very interesting too, because our country needs to continue to issue debt. We have a massive cliff coming up in terms of rolling over some of the debt that we have, and we still have very high interest rates. I mean, we're spending so much just on interest expense. And what are we going to do if there's no buyers for the debt? That's a huge problem for us. So I think that's why strategically there was a priority by Congress to pass this stablecoin legislation because stablecoins have been massive customers for the US Treasury market, and they do extend dollar dominance. I mean, they're very popular in emerging markets where people can't get USD bank accounts, but they can download crypto wallets and exchange their fiat currencies for a stablecoin like Tether or Circle. So I think we're going to see even more stablecoins now with the Genius Act signed into law. We're going to see the big banks getting involved, and that will, I think, extend dollar dominance around the world. And ultimately, I think it will help Bitcoin adoption because not only will it provide an on-ramp, and now, moving into Bitcoin is just as simple as one click, but also the fact that stablecoins at the end of the day, they're pegged to fiat currencies that inflate in supply and destroy your purchasing power. So maybe you can spend with them and it's more convenient, especially on a global level, but you really want to save in Bitcoin because it's finite and can never be printed.
Hmm. Can you break down what stablecoins actually are?
Sure, stablecoins are essentially dollar tokens. Think of like a chip at a casino. You could cash
Mhm.
it out at the end of the night. It's
Okay.
it's the same thing. A dollar stablecoin is pegged to a dollar. So if a company issues a dollar stablecoin, they have to have a dollar to back it up. And so the Genius Act actually stipulates that they have to be backed one-to-one with either cash reserves or short-term treasury bills. So a lot of these companies have just been gobbling up treasuries and earning interest on the back end, which is, if you look at a company like Tether, they don't have that many employees globally, but they've been able to generate an income that surpasses like Goldman Sachs. It's really, really crazy. So I'm sure a lot of other companies, a lot of banks are looking at that saying they want to be a part of that. And that's what the Genius Act will enable.
Hmm. And can you break down like the strategy of the business you're involved with? Like you're borrowing cash from people and then buying Bitcoin. That's the gist of it.
Well, a lot of the different corporations, they have different
Hmm.
strategies. The goal is really to obviously be accretive to shareholders and accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. So
Okay.
a lot of the companies, especially Semler Scientific, they have strong core businesses, which I think is a powerful accumulation tool. And then they use different strategies. At the market offerings, they can issue convertible debt. If your strategy, they're at the level of issuing these preferreds and they're dipping into the Bitcoin backed credit markets. And so I think that it's going to be really interesting to see these companies as they continue to grow. The more liquidity that they can achieve, the better, because they can get a little bit more creative with the products. And so I'm really excited to just be a part of this. I think what Semler Scientific is doing is absolutely phenomenal, and their eyes are on the prize when it comes to Bitcoin. Their focus is really to become a powerful Bitcoin company.
Awesome. So I've heard you say fix the money, fix the world a bunch, and it's in a lot of Bitcoin literature these days. If someone came to you, never really heard about Bitcoin, but hears that statement and says like, well, how does fixing the money fix like war in the Middle East? Like, how would you respond to that person?
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of going back to what we mentioned earlier, before I understood the problem and the fix, I saw the future as one where I was losing hope. I thought
Hmm.
that we're going to continue to get more polarized and more divided, and there would be more violence, there would be more civil unrest because people are frustrated when you have an entire generation basically that feels like they've done all the right things, they've played by the rules, and they're economically disenfranchised and they feel left behind and taken advantage of. That collective energy and anxiety and angst can build up to a revolution. And so, what do we need? We need a bridge away from sort of the chaos and the frustration into something that economically empowers the individual. And so, Bitcoin didn't necessarily have to be the solution, right? It could have been something else. But when you look at the possible solutions out there, including gold, which was once, the form of hard money that backed our dollars, or you look at the other technologies out there, Bitcoin is the one that has shown itself to be the most secure, the most decentralized, the most credible, and the one that is the most resilient. And so that's why I put my trust and faith in it. So when you look at the chaos around the world, which is only going to continue to grow as these fiat currencies get more and more manipulated, my answer is that we need a system that we can actually trust that is based on math and energy and something that no one can steal or manipulate from us. And when it comes to war and violence, Bitcoin actually defunds war because it's very easy to go to war and kind of take advantage of even your geopolitical position if you have a money printer, right? If you could just conjure up money out of thin air to pay for things like bullets and ammunition and troops, you can't do that on a Bitcoin standard. You actually have to provide value in order to earn Bitcoin, or you have to expend energy in order to mine it. So it really like changes the playing field a lot. And I think it would make for a more cooperative and peaceful world. And it's not a silver bullet. I mean, it will take years, decades probably to fix some of these issues. But I do think at the heart of what's wrong with so many of the things in our world, it really comes down to money and the average person feeling like, hey, I'm working hard and I'm not getting ahead. And this is unfair. And that sense of injustice is what I think drives a lot of the issues, drives even things like, personal health issues, mental health crises, drug addictions, violence against others. I think it just, we're like powder kegs when we feel like we're pent up and we don't know what to do anymore. That energy can be released in ways that are not productive in society. And if we can change that, if we can economically empower the individual, encourage things like growth and innovation and providing value, I think we can actually really change the world.
Awesome. Awesome response. Um, so I feel like I would be kicked if I didn't ask for some sort of price prediction. So where do you see Bitcoin next, maybe by the end of the year or next 2 years?
I definitely think we're going to hit another all-time high this year. I think the bull market has just barely even started. We're seeing more of this institutional adoption, but the floodgates have not been opened yet. A lot of these institutions have been waiting for the regulatory clarity, which we're starting to get. And also, when it comes to groups like RIAs and wealth advisors, there's like a bureaucratic process that they have to go through, and it takes a lot of time. They have to get consultants to sign off on it. Have to get the board to sign off on it, and the board only meets like 4 times a year. There's all these hurdles we have to go through. But once that happens in the coming years, I mean, all bets are off because, again, we have a supply that is finite and more demand. So I think that means that Bitcoin's price is going to continue to go up. And I think it is going to eat into these other asset classes like bonds and equities and real estate, which were great stores of value in the past for a long time. But they come with things that don't apply to Bitcoin, like maintenance costs and geopolitical, like tariff risks, property taxes, things that you don't have to worry about when it comes to Bitcoin, inflation risk when it comes to bonds. So I think more and more people will turn to Bitcoin, and it will go from a $2 trillion asset class to a 10 to a 20 to maybe someday down the road, 100 trillion.
Awesome. So with that, as we're winding down, I do like to ask everyone, what is the best and worst personal finance advice you've either heard or received?
Well, the worst would be sell your Bitcoin, obviously. It's so interesting to me that there are so many naysayers of Bitcoin who really haven't taken the time. And I just think that that is one of the most closed-minded things that you can do. And I admire people who have an open mind when they approach Bitcoin and they say, okay, I don't understand it. And maybe I was against it in the past, but I'm going to take the time to study it. And a lot of those people end up changing their mind.
Mm-hmm. In terms of like beginner resources, if someone were just hearing about it, where would you direct them other than your YouTube channel?
Well, in November, I will have a great introduction to Bitcoin book called Bitcoin is for
Ah,
Everyone. So I hope
okay.
everyone pre-orders it. But you really get to learn today the way that you like to fit your style. Some people like documentaries. I highly recommend God Bless Bitcoin. Some people like podcasts. There's great ones out there, including mine, but also Preston Pish's podcast, Walker's podcast, Danny Knoll's podcast. I mean, there's so many out there. There are books like The Bitcoin Standard, Broken Money, Price of Tomorrow. So you kind of get to choose your own adventure because there's a million ways to learn about Bitcoin today.
Awesome. Well, Natalie, I really appreciate the time you've taken to talk with me. And where can the listeners go to learn more about you and order your products?
Sure, you can head to my website, talkingbitcoin.com, and you can download my podcast wherever you stream your podcast. It's called Coin Stories with Natalie Brunell.
Awesome. We'll have links to all those. Thanks again.
Thank you.